Hey guys, tonight we're wading into a world that smells faintly of stale sweat, wood smoke, and something you can't quite name, but you suspect it's been fermenting for a while. You're about to explore the linen undergarments of medieval women, which, as you'll find, were not exactly fresh from the laundry. In fact, the concept of laundry day was more like laundry season. You'll walk through cramped, dimly lit homes, hear the scratch of coarse fabric against skin, and watch people share garments in a way that makes your modern mind twitch. And just when you start to wonder how anyone survived the sheer bacterial onslaught, you'll remember most didn't live past 40. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a one-room timber house, and the first thing you notice is the heat. The fire in the hearth burns low, but the air still feels thick and close. In the far corner, a woman kneels over a low bench, mending a long, loose garment, the chemise. It's made of undyed linen, so thin in places you can almost see your hand through it, but it's stiff from repeated wear. This isn't a nightgown. It's underwear. She wears it under her dress day and night, week after week. The fabric carries a faint grayish hue that linen gets when it hasn't been properly laundered in a while. Laundry itself is an ordeal, hauling water, heating it over a fire, pounding garments against a washboard or rock. You can almost hear the slap-slap of fabric against stone in your mind. But here, it happens rarely. Washing a chemise too often would wear it thin faster, and linen wasn't cheap. Many women owned only one or two at a time. You glance around and notice a child tugging on what is clearly a smaller version of the same garment. Shared clothing isn't a hand-me-down in the modern sense. It's more of a rotation. When one person finally washes their chemise, another might borrow it while their own dries. It's a cycle that makes you appreciate modern laundry machines in a way you never thought possible. Historians still argue whether most women boiled their laundry or simply soaked it in cold water with lye soap. The boiling method would kill lice and fleas, but it took far more firewood than most households could afford to burn for mere clothing. Cold washing saved fuel, but left behind most of the tiny, skittering tenants. You've seen enough of this world to know the likely outcome. People just lived with them. Speaking of lice, you notice the woman's casual scratching at her shoulder through the chemise. It's not frantic, more like a habitual adjustment. You imagine the seam lines where the fabric chafes against skin, trapping heat and sweat. The linen does wick moisture somewhat. It's better than wool for that. But after a few days, the fabric itself starts to smell faintly of old body odor mixed with wood smoke. You run your fingers over a folded pile of linen in the corner and feel the coarseness. This isn't your crisp, white, hotel bed kind of linen. This is home woven, sometimes uneven in texture, sometimes patched. A few pieces have visible stitches in different colors, scraps used to extend their life. Some have faint yellow stains in places people prefer not to mention, a quirky tidbit you might not expect. Some women sprinkled their undergarments with dried herbs like lavender or rosemary to freshen them between washes. The effect was optimistic. It masked the smell for an hour or two at most, but at least it offered a momentary illusion of cleanliness. In warmer months, you might find garments hung over bushes to air out in the sun, no soap, just wind and hope. When you step outside, you see a communal washing area by a slow-moving stream. Women kneel at the bank, beating linen against flat stones. The water is cloudy, carrying flecks of soap, mud, and other debris downstream. If you're unlucky enough to live downstream from this spot, your own washing water arrives pre-seasoned with everyone else's laundry residue. You probably don't think about that too much. It's either that or carry water uphill from a spring. There's a faint social rhythm to laundry. It's not done on a whim, it's scheduled. Some villages chose specific days when several women would gather to do the work together. It's part chore, part gossip session. You catch a snatch of conversation about someone's missing chickens, another about a merchant's strange new hat. It's hard to imagine these conversations happening in silence. Laundry is loud, laborious work, and talking makes it bearable. Back in the home, the chemise you saw earlier is being hung near the hearth. It will dry slowly overnight, soaking up the smell of wood smoke in the process. Tomorrow, someone will put it back on, and the cycle will continue. When you consider how long a single chemise might last, sometimes years, you realize that the idea of fresh clothing is relative. You aren't cycling through an infinite wardrobe. You're rotating between the same 2 or 3 garments until they literally fall apart. And when they do, the scraps become cleaning cloths, wound bandages, or are sewn into quilts. The strangest thing, no one here seems especially disturbed by any of it. The smell, the texture, the occasional flea bite, it's just background noise in a life where survival demands far more immediate attention. If you complained too much about your laundry, people would probably laugh. After all, your chemise is clean enough compared to the neighbor S. You shift your attention from the stiff, slightly sour-smelling linen to something far more intimate, your mouth. Or rather, the medieval version of oral care, which you quickly realize is less about minty freshness and more about doing asterisk something so your teeth don't all fall out by age 25. Though, spoiler alert, many still do. You're sitting at a rough-hewn wooden table, a flickering tallow candle casting shadows that make everyone's faces look faintly haunted. A woman across from you grins, a warm, gap-toothed smile, and reaches for a small clay pot. She dips 2 fingers into a grayish-black powder and begins rubbing it across her teeth with the enthusiasm of someone polishing a pair of boots. The gritty mixture is soot, crushed charcoal, and salt, sometimes with a pinch of dried mint if she's feeling fancy. The sensation is like rubbing sandpaper over enamel. You can almost feel the abrasion through your own teeth and you wince slightly as she spits a thin black liquid into the rushes on the floor. Historians still argue whether this was common practice among all social classes or mostly among the better off, who could afford ingredients like imported cloves or cinnamon. Some suggest that the very act of brushing was unusual, and many people instead relied on chewing herbs or rinsing with wine. Yes, wine. A warm swish of medieval red in the morning wasn't necessarily for pleasure. It was believed to disinfect the mouth. You lean closer and catch the scent of the soot paste, earthy, slightly metallic. It clings stubbornly to the woman's fingers, and she wipes them on her apron without much thought. This is oral hygiene here. Functional, not cosmetic. The goal isn't a Hollywood smile. It's just to keep the worst of the rot at bay for as long as possible. Of course, there's another camp entirely, those who believed brushing was asterisk bad for you. You hear this argument from an older woman with sharp eyes and deep creases around her mouth. It loosens the gums, she warns in a voice like worn leather. She explains that too much rubbing can make teeth fall out faster. And besides, God made you with a certain number of teeth, and they'll last as long as He intends, paste or no paste. You nod politely, though privately you suspect she's also saving herself the trouble. In the corner, a younger girl works a small twig between her teeth. It's a chewing stick cut from hazel or willow, stripped of bark and chewed, until the fibers fan out into a kind of primitive brush. She gnaws at it absent-mindedly, occasionally flicking out something, let's just say unappetizing. The stick smells faintly of sap and tannin. It's effective enough for dislodging bits of yesterday's bread, though whether it prevents cavities is another question entirely. A quirky tidbit you might not have guessed. Some medieval women swore by rubbing their teeth with crushed sage leaves. Sage was thought to both whiten and strengthen teeth, and unlike soot, it left behind a vaguely pleasant, herbal aftertaste. You watch one woman crumble dried sage between her palms, mix it with a few grains of salt, and dab it along her gums with deliberate care. Your host, clearly pleased by your curiosity, offers you a taste of something she calls a tooth powder. You hesitate wisely, but curiosity wins. The moment it hits your tongue, you're assaulted by a mixture of bitter herbs and the mineral tang of ground eggshells. The eggshells are for strength, she says, though you're fairly certain you just crunched on something that would make your dentist weep. The social etiquette around bad breath is flexible. People here are used to the smell of each other's meals, lingering for hours, garlic, onions, strong ale. You lean back as a woman tells you about her husband's new boots, and the warmth of her words is accompanied by a gust of something that makes your eyes water. It's not malicious, it's simply life. If someone really wants to freshen up before company, they might chew fennel seeds or parsley. But that's more for politeness than hygiene. As you listen, you realize oral care is less a daily ritual and more an occasional effort, often tied to social moments. You freshen before going to market, meeting guests, or attending church. But days, even weeks, can pass without a thorough cleaning. Missing teeth are common, and people wear the gaps like badges of endurance. Historians still debate whether cavities were as common then as now. On one hand, the medieval diet was lower in refined sugar, which should mean fewer dental problems. On the other hand, gritty bread, full of stone-ground flour particles, acted like sandpaper, wearing teeth down over time. You imagine biting into a hunk of bread and hearing a faint crunch that isn't food. That's normal here. That's just chewing medieval bread. One woman at the table leans in and confides, in a tone half proud, half conspiratorial, that she has a secret recipe for a mouth rinse. It involves vinegar, honey, and a pinch of alum. She claims it draws out the foulness. You're skeptical, but you take a whiff. The sharp tang of vinegar nearly makes you cough, and you can see how it might strip away some smells, and possibly the first few layers of your tongue. There's also the matter of tooth pain. Without modern dentistry, a bad tooth could mean weeks of agony. You overhear talk of using heated metal instruments to cauterize an exposed nerve, a thought that makes you instinctively cover your own mouth. Others swear by holding a clove between aching teeth, which at least offers mild numbing. And when a tooth simply can't be saved, well, that's where the tooth drawers come in. They're not trained dentists, more like traveling specialists who'll yank the offending molar with pliers, or even fingers if necessary. Some towns have a local blacksmith double as a tooth puller, which feels both resourceful and slightly horrifying. You imagine getting your dental care from someone who also forges horseshoes. As you watch the group settle into post-meal conversation, you notice the casual way they pick their teeth. No self-consciousness, no shame. A chicken bone is pressed into service as a toothpick, then set back on the table for someone else to use. You swallow hard. The idea of personal dental tools is still centuries away. Still, there's a kind of charm to it. Oral care here is woven into daily rhythms, part superstition, part practicality, part social ritual. People share recipes for powders and rinses like they might share bread recipes today. There's pride in having your own method, even if it's just rubbing your gums with a rag dipped in ale. Before you leave, someone hands you a small pouch of dried mint leaves. For your breath, she says with a smile. You tuck it into your pocket, though you suspect the mint will be more useful for masking the smell of your own linen than for impressing anyone with a fresh smile. And as you step back into the narrow street, your mouth feels strangely aware of itself, grateful for modern toothpaste, yes, but also oddly connected to these women who managed, with soot, salt, and stubbornness, to keep smiling through a world where toothbrushes were still centuries from being commonplace. You're still working that faint gritty feeling out of your teeth when you notice the glint of something in the sunlight. A strand of hair catching the light like a silk thread. Except silk doesn't usually have this much grease. A woman sits on a low stool, a wide-toothed wooden comb in one hand, and a lump of something pale and waxy in the other. She runs her fingers through her hair, coating each section with the stuff before dragging the comb through with a slow, deliberate pull. The smell hits you before you're even close, an unmistakable mix of animal fat and wood ash. You know right away this isn't some luxurious conditioner from a spa. This is tallow, rendered from sheep or cow fat, softened and mixed with ash to create a crude cleansing paste. It's strange to watch half hair care, half arm workout. The comb catches on knots, and she pulls hard, wincing, but continuing without pause. A small shower of white specks falls onto her apron. For a brief, optimistic moment, you hope it's ash residue, until you see one of them wriggle. Lice are the silent cohabitants of medieval hair. You notice how casually they're dealt with here, picked out, crushed between nails, flicked into the fire. There's no dramatic screaming, no frantic head scratching like you might expect. They're simply part of the landscape of life. A shared comb might carry more than just the memory of the last person's hairstyle, but no one's making a fuss about it. Historians still argue whether women kept their hair completely covered outdoors primarily for modesty, or as a practical defense against pests. Some say veils, wimples, and linen coifs were as much about keeping lice from hopping between heads as they were about social decorum. You're inclined to believe both explanations can be true. Modesty is easier to maintain when it also keeps the scratching to a minimum. The woman leans toward you, offering the comb. You hesitate, but take it, feeling the smooth wood worn down by years of use. The teeth are uneven, hand-carved, and there's a faint residue of fat clinging to them. She gestures toward a small pot beside her. You dip a finger in, feeling the slightly gritty texture of the tallow and ash mix. It's warm from sitting near the hearth, pliable enough to work through hair, and it leaves a faint sheen on your skin that will probably stay there until you wash with actual soap. A quirky tidbit: rosemary water was sometimes used as a rinse for hair, both for scent and supposed pest prevention. Some women would boil rosemary in water, let it cool, and pour it over their heads in what must have been one of the more pleasant parts of their hygiene routine. The scent lingers faintly on one young woman nearby, sharp, herbal, almost clean, though not enough to overpower the omnipresent tallow smell. You watch as two women help each other with their hair. One holds the comb, the other sits with her head tilted forward, hair falling in a curtain. The comb passes slowly, methodically, each stroke checked for signs of movement. The rhythm is almost soothing, and for a moment, you forget the practical purpose and just enjoy the sound of wood against hair, the quiet crackle from the hearth. Then the woman with the comb pauses, pinches something between her nails, and without even looking, pops it between two small stones, pressing hard. There's a faint snap. She smiles faintly, satisfied, and goes back to combing. You quickly remind yourself that this is their asterisk normal, even if you're fairly sure you'll be itching for the rest of the day just from watching. Some women here braid their hair tightly, tucking it under their head, coverings to keep it cleaner for longer. The braids aren't decorative, they're functional, minimizing loose strands that might collect dust, ash, or cooking smoke. Washing hair is rare, mostly because it's a project that requires heated water, extra soap, a precious commodity, and a long drying time in a world where drafty rooms and damp weather can turn wet hair into chill that settles in your bones. In fact, some people believed washing hair too often could make you sick. You hear an older woman mutter something about weakening the head if it gets wet too frequently, especially in winter. Instead, oils and powders were used to absorb grease and add scent. Crushed iris root, for example, could be sprinkled into hair as a kind of medieval dry shampoo. The sensory experience of this hair care world is intense. The faint smokiness from the hearth mingles with the fatty aroma of tallow, the sharp bite of rosemary, and the occasional whiff of something less pleasant, sweat from a scalp that hasn't seen water in weeks. If you close your eyes, it's both comforting and oppressive, a scent profile that says, "This is home," but home is never entirely clean. Lice aren't the only intruders in medieval hair. Fleas sometimes travel upward from bedding, and without regular laundering of sheets, or what passes for sheets, they can live quite happily in braids and headscarves. Some women use fine sand to try to scratch them out, running the grit along the scalp. You can hear the rasp as the sand drags through the hair, a noise that makes you involuntarily tighten your jaw. You notice, too, that hair is rarely cut short for women unless there's illness or a monastic vow involved. Long hair is a mark of femininity, even if most of it stays hidden. There's pride in its length and thickness, a sign of health despite the pests. When hair does get washed, it's often an event done outside in warm weather, with helpers to pour water and detangle afterward. One woman tells you, through a translator's patient repetition, that she only washes her hair twice a year, spring and autumn, unless there's a need, which she leaves vague, but implies could mean lice getting out of hand. She laughs when she sees your raised eyebrows. "It's too much work otherwise," she says, and you can't argue with her logic, given what you've seen so far. Historians still debate how common scented oils were in everyday life. You can imagine them being a rare treat, reserved for feast days or weddings. The idea of hair smelling like jasmine or rosewater seems almost decadent here, where the goal is more about keeping it manageable than fragrant. As the afternoon light fades, the woman on the stool finishes her combing. She smooths her hair back, pins it into place, and covers it with a linen coif. From the outside, you'd never guess at the process that just took place: the slow combing, the pest checks, the fat worked in strand by strand. She moves on to help her neighbor, and you realize this is as much a social act as it is hygiene. You run your own fingers through your hair and find yourself absurdly grateful for modern shampoo. But there's something oddly grounding in watching these women's deliberate movements, their quiet cooperation. The process isn't glamorous, but it's intimate, shared work in a world where nothing about staying clean is simple, and as you step away, you catch yourself thinking about rosemary water and whether, if you were stuck here for long, you'd be tempted to try it. Just for the chance to smell something fresh in your own hair, even for a little while, you leave the small, smoky room where the scent of tallow still clings to your hair and clothes, stepping into the narrow lane outside. The air is only marginally fresher. There's still the faint tang of manure from the street, but at least it's different. You follow a woman carrying a small clay jug, her skirts brushing the ground. She's headed toward what you quickly realize is not a bathhouse, not a laundry space, but her own home, where she plans to freshen up. The jug doesn't contain water. It holds rosewater, thin, pale, and fragrant in the way a wilted bouquet is fragrant. You watch as she sets it on a stool, dips her fingers in, and dabs it across her neck and the inside of her wrists. The scent rises immediately sweet, floral, and slightly sour from the clay vessel. She closes her eyes as if inhaling a luxury. Then she leans forward, pours a small trickle over her head, and rubs it quickly into her hairline. You're expecting this to be a prelude to washing, but no. This is asterisk the washing. The rosewater isn't cleaning anything. It's layering a pleasant smell over whatever's already there. And what's there is a couple of days worth of cooking smoke, sweat, and whatever odors drift in from the street. Historians still argue about just how rarely people in the Middle Ages bathed. Some point to records of elaborate bathhouses in towns and cities, suggesting it was more frequent than the cliché would have you believe. Others argue that those facilities were limited to the wealthy or to special occasions, while the average rural woman might go weeks, months, even without full immersion in water. What you're seeing now supports the latter argument. Scent as substitute. A quirky tidbit floats into your mind. In some places, particularly among the nobility, perfumes were stored in hollowed-out pomanders, small metal spheres pierced with holes, so the scent could be carried and occasionally sniffed like an olfactory shield against the world. Here, among the lower classes, there's no such finery. Scents are applied directly to the body or to clothing. One woman soaks a strip of linen in lavender water, wrings it out, and tucks it into her bodice so the smell rises toward her face all day. The scents themselves vary. Rosewater is the most common, but you catch whiffs of rosemary, thyme, and even sage. Some women prefer a vinegar base infused with herbs, believing it not only improves their personal aroma, but also wards off illness. The vinegar scent is sharp, almost medicinal, and you can't help thinking it probably overpowers anything it's trying to mask. As you follow the rhythm of the day, you notice that perfuming happens in moments of preparation, before going to church, before receiving guests, before market day. It's not a daily necessity, but a social one. Today, the woman with the rosewater is heading to visit her sister. She smooths her hair, adjusts her headscarf, and sprinkles a bit more rosewater on the scarf itself. When she puts it on, the fabric's scent drifts into the air with every movement. It's an odd sensory mix, floral sweetness woven into the faint musk of unwashed fabric, the smokiness of the hearth, and the ever-present street dust. In modern terms, it's like spraying perfume over a sweater you've worn 3 days in a row. You notice both smells at once, layered rather than replaced. Historians still debate whether this habit of scent layering was purely practical or also symbolic. Some argue that perfumes marked a kind of status, even if you couldn't bathe often. Smelling of roses suggested refinement. Others note that certain herbs were tied to religious or magical beliefs, making the scent an amulet as much as a deodorizer. You can see the logic in both. The women you watch seem to enjoy the process. It's a small indulgence in a life full of hard work, an easy way to feel momentarily better. The act itself is careful and deliberate, as if applying scent is a private ritual. One woman rubs thyme leaves between her palms, then runs her hands over her hair, breathing deeply. She smiles faintly as she tucks her hair back into place. A quirky detail catches your eye. The clay jug of rose water isn't stoppered. Dust and the occasional stray insect might fall in, but no one seems overly concerned. The scent remains strong enough to mask small imperfections. You're beginning to understand that medieval freshness is relative. If it smells better than before, it's good enough. You try to imagine a day without soap or showers, relying solely on these herbal waters. The closest modern comparison might be a very thorough spritz of body spray, but with the added knowledge that your clothes, hair, and skin haven't been properly scrubbed in quite some time. Yet here, no one wrinkles their nose at each other. Either their senses have adapted, or the communal baseline makes the smell unremarkable. Perfume in this context also travels differently. Without synthetic fixatives, the scent fades faster. You notice that within an hour of application, the rosewater has softened to a faint, ghostly sweetness. By the end of the afternoon, it's barely there, replaced by the day's other aromas. This fleeting quality means the ritual has to be repeated often if you want to maintain the effect, which might explain why some women carry small pouches of herbs with them, ready to crush and sniff at will. The men here don't seem nearly as invested in perfuming themselves. You catch the occasional whiff of something herbal on a man's cloak, but more often their scent is a straightforward combination of sweat, leather, and smoke. The women's scents, by contrast, create moments of unexpected beauty, tiny pockets of fragrance in a sensory world otherwise ruled by harsher smells. One woman invites you to try a rinse she's made from meadowsweet flowers. The water is faintly golden, the smell sweet with a hint of almond. She pours a little into your hands, and you pat it onto your neck. It's pleasant, but you realize that on your already travel-worn clothing, the scent stands out like a ribbon on a muddy boot, noticeable, but not transformative. As evening approaches, you pass a group of women returning from the fields. Their dresses are dusty, their cheeks flushed. One of them carries a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside are fresh sprigs of lavender, tied together with a bit of twine. She explains that she'll tuck them into her bedding tonight so she can sleep in the flowers. The idea is less about cleaning the bed than making it smell like something other than damp straw. You begin to understand why historians can't quite agree on whether medieval life was truly filthy by our standards. There's clearly an effort here: perfumes, herbs, scented rinses. But it's effort within the constraints of water scarcity, labor demands, and cultural norms that simply don't prize daily scrubbing. The result is a blend of ingenuity and resignation, where scent becomes a tool for comfort, not an absolute measure of cleanliness. By the time you leave the small lane and head toward the square, your senses are saturated. The mingling of herbs and humanity clings to you like a souvenir. You catch yourself wondering if, after a few weeks here, you'd stop noticing the underlying sweat altogether, and whether, once you returned home, a spritz of modern perfume might feel strangely hollow without the depth of smoke and earth beneath it. The soft, floral haze of rosewater fades as you follow a winding street toward the sound of splashing and low laughter. The air grows warmer and damp, and you catch the faint scent of wet wood and soaproot. Rounding the corner, you find yourself at the entrance of a bathhouse, though if you were expecting marble floors and serene fountains, you're in for a medieval reality check. The building is timber framed, the roofline sagging slightly under years of steam and smoke. Inside, the light is dim, filtered through small, clouded windows. The first thing you notice is the heat, moist and heavy, curling your hair instantly. The second thing you notice is the water. It's not exactly crystal clear. A long wooden tub sits in the center of the room, wide enough for half a dozen people to sit shoulder to shoulder. The water is lukewarm and slightly cloudy, with flecks of soap scum swirling lazily near the surface. The women inside seem unbothered. They lean against the tub's edge, chatting, their voices low and easy. Some have their hair pinned up. Others let it trail in the water like pale ribbons. You step closer and hear the rhythm of the conversation. Gossip about neighbors, updates on children, speculation about the upcoming market day. This isn't just hygiene, it's social currency. News travels faster in a bathhouse than anywhere else in the village. A quirky detail catches your attention. A bucket in the corner filled with steeping herbs, rosemary, sage, and a sprig of juniper. The water has turned a pale greenish gold. One of the women dips a cup in and pours it over her shoulders. You watch as she smooths it down her arms, the scent rising in a cloud. The herbal infusion isn't just for fragrance. Some believe it wards off illness, the heat driving the bad humors out through the skin. Historians still argue about when public bathing began to decline in Europe. In some places, bathhouses were bustling well into the late Middle Ages. In others, fear of disease, especially during plague years, led to their closure. The lingering belief that warm water opened the pores and allowed sickness to seep in didn't help. You can imagine the rumors. A single sick woman sharing the tub could curse the health of everyone else. For now, though, This bathhouse is alive with warmth and chatter. The women inside are a mix of ages: an elderly grandmother scrubbing her arms with a rag, a young mother cradling a baby in the shallow end, a teenager flicking droplets at her friend when she thinks no one's watching. Privacy is minimal. Modesty is a flexible concept here, adjusted for practicality. You're offered a seat on the tub's edge, and you can feel the steam wrapping around your face. Someone hands you a sliver of soap, soft, almost gelatinous, made from animal fat and lye. It smells faintly of ash and something sharp, like old cheese. The woman next to you lathers it between her hands, though the bubbles are scant compared to modern soap. She scrubs her arms briskly, then rinses by scooping water over herself. The same water flows back into the tub for everyone else to enjoy. If you're thinking this sounds like an efficient germ exchange program, you're not wrong. But here, the shared bath is seen as purifying, not risky. And to be fair, it probably is asterisk an improvement over going weeks without washing at all. The floor is strewn with wooden clogs, baskets of clothing, and a few neatly folded linen towels. The towels are small, more like napkins, and you suspect they're intended more for padding than full drying. Most women simply let the air do the work, chatting as their skin cools and the dampness fades. One particularly talkative woman leans toward you, lowering her voice to share a tidbit about a neighbor who's been meeting a merchant after dark near the grain store. The bathhouse, you realize, is part cleansing ritual, part live newsfeed. The warm water seems to loosen not just dirt, but tongues. Another quirky element, the occasional presence of men. In some towns, bathing was mixed gender at certain times of day, though here the women clearly have their own hours. You imagine how complicated those mixed sessions must have been for concepts of propriety, and for the storytellers who inevitably embroidered them later. After a while, you notice the water's warmth ebbing. The fire heating the cauldron in the next room is dying down, and fresh hot water is a limited commodity. One woman calls for her daughter to fetch more herbs. Another begins wringing out her hair over the tub's edge. The strands drip into the cloudy bath, merging with whatever else lingers in there. You try not to think too hard about it. Historians still debate whether people actually bathed together, in the literal sense, fully immersing at the same time, or if they took turns in the same water. The reality probably varied by place, season, and social group. Here, it's clearly communal. And while you can imagine the potential for illness, you can also see the undeniable value. This is one of the few moments in a week when these women aren't toiling alone. There's also an unspoken etiquette to the bathhouse. You don't remark on anyone's body. You don't rush another out of her seat. And you definitely don't splash more than playfully. Offenses are noted, even if they're forgiven. The space is too important to risk losing over petty conflict. As the group begins to dress, you notice how little fuss is made about drying thoroughly. Damp hair is twisted into cloths. Skin is rubbed down quickly with a linen scrap, and clothes are pulled back on, while skin is still slightly wet. The dampness will linger for hours, mixing with body heat and fabric to create a unique scent, half herbal, half human. One last quirky moment. Before leaving, a woman splashes a handful of water onto the wooden bench beside her and rubs it clean. Not because it's sanitary, more because it's polite. The idea of leaving a tidy bath space is clearly valued, even if their definition of tidy would give a modern health inspector heart palpitations. When you finally step back into the street, the cool air feels sharp in your lungs. Your skin carries the faint ghost of rosemary and lye, but beneath it, you can still detect the familiar smoke and sweat base note of medieval life. You find yourself oddly refreshed, not just from the steam, but from the warmth of the conversations you overheard. Proof that even in cloudy water, there's something deeply cleansing about sharing space and stories. You follow the bathhouse crowd back into the winding lanes, their damp skirts brushing against the muddy ground. As the women peel off toward their own homes, your attention drifts downward to the sound of leather soles clapping against the dirt. You've been watching their feet all day without meaning to, and now you can't unsee it. Stiff leather shoes, often misshapen, sometimes split at the sides, and more often than not, worn without socks. Your own feet ache in sympathy just looking at them. The shoes are simple turned leather, stitched together at the seams, the kind you could slip on in seconds, but might never really break in the way you'd hope. Inside, there's no cushioned insole, no soft lining. Just leather on skin, or leather on whatever rag someone has stuffed inside to take up the space. You notice the way people walk carefully, as if each step tests the ground for rocks or sharp sticks. The leather is thin enough that every pebble makes itself known. And because socks aren't standard, the feet inside are constantly rubbing against the shoe's inner surface. That rubbing, plus the inevitable dampness from sweat, creates a kind of slow, daily foot stew. Historians still argue about the prevalence of foot washing rituals. Some records suggest it was tied to religious observances, washing your feet before entering certain spaces, especially during high holy days. Others say that, for most, it was reserved for the rare occasions when guests came to stay. In either case, it wasn't a daily habit. You step inside a small cottage and find a woman sitting near the hearth with one shoe off, rubbing her bare foot with a rag. The skin is rough, almost gray in places from ground-in dirt. There's no fresh basin of water nearby, just a shallow wooden bowl filled with what looks like yesterday's rinse water. She dips the rag in, wrings it out, and swipes it over her toes. It's more about removing the visible dirt than deep cleaning. A quirky detail. In summer, some women slip aromatic herbs into their shoes, not for comfort, but to counteract the smell. Crushed mint or thyme serves as a primitive deodorizer, though the effect lasts only until the herbs break down into a damp paste underfoot. You can imagine the sensation, your feet releasing little puffs of scent with every step until somewhere around midday. The mint note shifts into something far less appetizing. You're invited to sit, and someone offers to show you their good shoes, reserved for feast days. They're slightly cleaner, the leather polished with animal fat, the stitching tighter. You notice they're still unlined, still destined to carry the same smells and sweat as the everyday pair, just with a slightly more respectable exterior. These shoes are part fashion, part display of status, even if the wearer's feet tell the same story underneath. As you walk back outside, you catch sight of a girl perched on a low stone wall, swinging her legs. Her shoes are off entirely, and she's picking at the skin near her heel. Without socks, calluses build up quickly, especially when shoes rub in the same places day after day. She smiles shyly when she sees you looking, then shrugs in a way that says, "Everyone's feet look like this." Historians still debate how often medieval people actually went barefoot. In poorer communities, especially in warmer months, it was probably common to skip shoes entirely, at least for short trips or while working in fields. That might spare the leather from wear, but does nothing for keeping feet clean soil, manure, and whatever else is underfoot would cling stubbornly. At the market square, you see evidence of both habits. Some women wear their shoes even in the heat, their leather darkened from sweat, while others go barefoot, toes spreading naturally in the dust. The barefoot women seem quicker, more comfortable moving over uneven ground, though their soles are visibly thickened from years of exposure. There's an unspoken practicality to foot care here. If you injure your foot, blisters, cuts, infections, you risk days or weeks of reduced mobility, which can mean lost income or missed chores. So women find small ways to protect themselves, stuffing extra linen into a loose shoe, softening the leather with tallow, soaking feet in warm water when the opportunity arises. A quirky trick one older woman tells you about: rubbing garlic juice on cracked heels to draw out the badness. Whether it helps is questionable, but the pungent scent might at least keep pests away from the wound. She laughs when you wrinkle your nose and says, "Better smell than pain." You're shown the corner of a house where shoes are stored, not neatly lined up, but tossed in a heap near the door. The pile smells faintly of damp earth and old leather, with a sharper note underneath that's unmistakably human. No one here seems embarrassed by it. The smell is simply part of life. Watching the women step back into their shoes, you realize how much of their day is spent on their feet. They walk to the fields, to the market, to the stream, all in footwear that offers little support or cushioning. By evening, the feet inside must be swollen, warm, and fragrant in ways no sprig of mint can fully disguise. It's easy to imagine a modern person recoiling from the sensation, but here, there's acceptance. Foot odor isn't a personal failing, it's the inevitable outcome of a day's work. If anything, it's proof that you've been useful. A pair of truly pristine shoes might even be suspicious, suggesting laziness or vanity. When the sun dips low, you see a small gathering outside one home. A shallow wooden tub has been filled with warm water, and two women take turns soaking their feet. They sigh audibly, smiling at each other. It's not just about cleaning, it's relief, a chance to rest while the heat seeps into their bones. The water clouds quickly with dirt, but no one hurries to replace it. The point isn't purity, it's comfort. As you leave them, you can still hear their quiet conversation and occasional laughter over the gentle splash of water. It strikes you that, like so much of medieval hygiene, foot care isn't about striving for some unreachable standard of cleanliness. It's about small acts of maintenance, enough to keep moving through a life where every step, quite literally, counts. You don't need to lean in too far to notice it. The faint, sharp tang that wafts from under a raised arm as a woman reaches for a basket. It's the smell of underarm hygiene, medieval style, which is to say, a blend of human effort, improvisation, and the occasional gamble with questionable chemistry. You walk alongside a woman hauling water, and as she shifts the bucket from one hand to the other, you catch sight of a pale smear under her sleeve. It's not deodorant as you know it, but a chalky mixture that could be any number of things: powdered herbs, crushed minerals, or a thin paste of vinegar and plant sap. These concoctions are applied directly to the skin, often with no rinsing beforehand. Some mixtures are harmless, even pleasant, rose petals mashed into goose fat, for instance, giving a light floral scent with each movement. Others, however, edge into the dangerous. You've heard talk of a whitening paste containing ground lead, which women use to purify the skin under their arms, much as they do for their faces. Historians still argue whether these more toxic blends were common practice or luxury indulgences reserved for the wealthy. But the risks would have been the same regardless. You see a small pot on a table, its lid carved from bone, containing a creamy, pale green salve. When you dip a cautious fingertip inside, it smells strongly of vinegar and sage. The vinegar acts as an antibacterial of sorts, cutting down the scent for a time, but its acidity also stings raw or recently shaved skin, if shaving happened at all. Hair removal wasn't standard here. More often, hair was simply trimmed short or left as nature intended. And that leads to another point. Many believed that underarm hair helped draw out bad humors or excess sweat from the body, making removal not just unnecessary, but potentially harmful. Others, more concerned with appearance, did attempt to manage it, plucking with small tweezers or singeing with a candle flame, a method you sincerely hope remains in the past. In the marketplace, a woman selling bundles of dried lavender tells you it's her bestseller for tucking. That is, women wrap sprigs into their sleeves or pin them into the folds of their gowns near the underarm area. Every time the arm moves, the scent is released like a medieval perfume diffuser. The effect works until the lavender dries to brittle dust, which doesn't take long in summer heat. A quirky tidbit: in some places, women use slices of cold onion under their arms before gatherings, not to mask smell, but thought to provoke sweating. They believe sweating helps purge illness, and underarm sweat is considered especially potent in this regard. You don't get close enough to verify, but you imagine the mingling aromas of onion, body heat, and wool dress are exactly the stuff of romantic ballads. Bathing the underarms specifically is an odd topic in the historical record. Some religious texts mention washing the hidden places during certain rites, but whether that meant daily attention or only during high holidays is debated. What's certain is that without frequent bathing, the underarm becomes a miniature ecosystem, warm, dark, and rich in whatever dust, smoke, and sweat you've collected during the day. You watch a woman prepare for what appears to be a small feast. She takes a cloth dampened with rosewater and dabs both armpits, pressing the fabric firmly as if trying to imprint the scent. Then she applies a dusting of powdered orris root, known for its faint violet smell and absorbent texture. For the first hour or two, she'll smell faintly floral. After that, nature takes over. Historians still argue whether these aromatic efforts were purely cosmetic, or if they had symbolic value, sweetness of scent being tied to moral character in some medieval writing. A sweet woman was not only pleasant to be near, but also virtuous. Whether anyone was fooled by this scented posturing is another matter entirely. In the more practical corners of town, you see women using what's available, rubbing a handful of crushed mint leaves under each arm, for example, or swiping the skin with a cloth dipped in ale. The alcohol may offer a momentary antibacterial effect, but more likely, it just adds another note to the symphony of smells. A humorous aside slips into your thoughts. In modern life, a deodorant commercial promises 48-hour protection, while here, a sprig of mint offers maybe 48 minutes. And even that's optimistic if the day involves walking uphill with a water bucket. Near the edge of the village, you're invited into a kitchen where a woman is stirring a pot of what looks like porridge, but smells oddly sharp. It's her sweat paste, barley flour mixed with vinegar, smeared under the arms in a thin layer to absorb moisture. The flour dries and flakes off during the day, leaving little pale crumbs in the folds of clothing. She laughs when she tells you her husband calls it my trail for finding you in the dark. It's not all DIY, though. In wealthier homes, perfumed oils from far-off lands make their way into daily use. A dab of imported attar of roses or a streak of spikenard oil can signal status as much as cleanliness. These scents are strong enough to mask the underarm entirely for a time. But such luxuries are rare and costly, and even then, they mingle with the body rather than erase it. One evening, as the air cools, you watch a group of women dancing in a circle at the edge of a bonfire. The heat rises, the wool gowns trap the warmth, and you know without asking that every single one of them has her own underarm strategy, in place be it vinegar, herbs, or nothing at all. Yet no one seems self-conscious. In this world, the human smell is part of the atmosphere, as unremarkable as wood smoke, or the scent of baking bread. You think about how much effort goes into our modern obsession with freshness showers, antiperspirants, scented sprays, and realize that for medieval women, the goal was never eradication. It was modulation, the small daily choices that could shift a smell from sharp to tolerable, from noticeable to maybe even pleasant. And so you move on, still carrying the faint mix of sage, vinegar, and humanity in your nose, reminded that hygiene here is as much about fitting into the sensory world as it is about standing out in it. You wander further along a narrow alley, your boots clicking softly against the uneven stones, and the scent changes from vinegar and herbs to something earthier, something that seems to cling low to the ground. You realize you've stepped into the realm of the medieval laundry yard, where foot and leg hygiene is not so much an art form as an afterthought, tacked onto the end of an already long day. Women sit on low stools or crouch near shallow troughs of water, skirts hitched up just enough to keep them from dragging in the muck. Their feet are bare, toes spread against the damp wood as they stomp on linens to press out the suds. You notice immediately. The skin on their heels is rough, the toenails uneven, and there's a faint greenish tint in some of the cracks. It's the mark of standing for hours in water that is exactly fresh, more a tepid brew of ash lye, soapwort, and whatever grit dripped from the cloth. Daily foot washing. Only in theory. For many women, the day begins before sunrise and ends after dark. Feet are wiped with a damp rag if they're lucky, or simply brushed free of loose dirt before pulling on wool stockings. Historians still argue whether medieval women thought of feet as a true hygiene priority, or merely as tools for work, much like a broom or a cartwheel. A mainstream fact is that in certain wealthier households, a basin for foot washing might be brought around at night. Warm water, scented lightly with herbs like thyme or rosemary, would be poured over the feet before bed, both for cleanliness and to soothe aching joints. But in most homes, especially in towns and villages, the notion of a nightly wash feels laughably indulgent. You pause to watch a woman rubbing her calf briskly with a piece of rough linen. The fabric catches on her skin, leaving faint red streaks. She's exfoliating, although she wouldn't call it that. The goal is to scrape away dried mud and flaking skin so her stockings won't chafe as much tomorrow. She works quickly, glancing toward a pot on the fire that's threatening to boil over. For odor control, the options are well limited. You spot a small pouch tied around one woman's ankle, releasing a faint minty smell. She tells you it's filled with pennyroyal, a plant known to deter fleas and freshen the leg. It doesn't last long, especially after trudging through muddy streets where the runoff from tanneries, butcher stalls, and chamber pots all mingle in a cheerful brown stream. You probably wouldn't survive walking barefoot here unless you were already used to it. A quirky tidbit. In some rural traditions, women soak their feet in warm beer, not for relaxation, but as a treatment for cracked heels. The yeasts were believed to soften calluses, though whether it actually worked or just left them smelling like a tavern is still up for debate. Another debate that still lingers in the scholarly world is whether medieval women trimmed toenails regularly or simply let them grow until they became a problem. The evidence is scarce. Nail clippers existed in some form, but knives and shears were more common tools for the task. The thought of casually slicing away at a toenail with a kitchen knife makes you instinctively curl your toes inside your shoes. And speaking of shoes, footwear is a mixed blessing. Soft leather boots, when kept dry, offer some comfort, but in wet seasons they become sponges. The damp, combined with hours of wear, leads to the familiar scent of feet you probably recognize from modern life, only amplified by wool stockings and a lack of ventilation. Women sometimes stuff aromatic moss inside their shoes to mask the smell and pad the sole. The moss works until it's flattened into a damp mat, which is sooner than you'd hope. You catch a light-hearted moment. Two young girls splash each other while washing their feet in a shallow basin. They giggle at the muddy water swirling around them, entirely unbothered by the grit still clinging between their toes. Their mother watches from the doorway, clearly unconcerned. Tomorrow, those same feet will be dusty again before the morning meal is over. For women who work indoors, like bakers or spinners, the challenges are different. Standing for hours on hard floors causes swelling, so they sometimes wrap their feet in strips of linen before putting on stockings. These wraps can double as makeshift cleaning cloths at the end of the day when they're already damp from sweat. Practical, if not exactly sanitary. And then there's winter. Cold weather means fewer chances to expose the feet to fresh air. Stockings might go unwashed for weeks, collecting layers of perspiration and skin cells. In this season, a quick rub with snow might be the only freshening they get, followed immediately by tucking them back into warm, unventilated boots. One evening, you witness a small act of kindness. An elderly woman sits by the fire, massaging her own feet with goose fat. She tells you it's to keep the skin from cracking, though the fat leaves a faint barnyard smell that clings stubbornly to the room. The heat from the fire softens both the fat and the woman's expression. She looks almost blissful, even if the aroma would drive a modern spa-goer out the door. And it's worth remembering these women don't expect their feet to be perfectly smooth or scentless. The measure of good hygiene here is whether your feet carry you through the day without blistering, cracking, or becoming infected. A little smell is simply part of the bargain. By the time you leave the laundry yard, the air seems cleaner, though your nose still carries the memory of beer, moss, and wool. You glance down at your own shoes, suddenly aware of how lucky you are that your daily walk doesn't involve dodging puddles of tannery runoff. You make a mental note to be extra kind to your feet tonight. Maybe even give them a wash before bed, though after what you've just seen, your standards for clean feel considerably more relaxed. You make your way from the laundry yard toward the quieter edge of town, where the houses grow smaller and the gardens larger, and where the conversation, if you happen to overhear it, turns to subjects that, in polite company, might earn a sharp change of topic. You're headed toward the realm of the monthly cycle, a private but ever-present part of women's lives that medieval hygiene handled with a blend of practicality, superstition, and occasional head-scratching improvisation. Tonight, the air is still, and you can almost hear the rustle of linen skirts brushing against door frames. Inside one small timber-framed house, you catch sight of a woman kneeling by the fire, not to tend the cooking pot, but to dry a square of cloth. It's thick, worn, and faintly stained, a menstrual rag, laundered as best as possible in cold water and ash soap, now hanging limply from a wooden rod. The fabric is rough by modern standards, but in a time when woven cloth is precious, it's meant to be reused for years. Mainstream historical accounts tell us that in many parts of medieval Europe, women relied on clouts or rags for menstrual protection strips of linen or wool that could be secured between the legs with a belt, or simply held in place by the fit of one's undergarments. Washing them was nobody's favorite chore, and in winter, drying them could be a challenge, especially in cramped, smoky interiors. Sometimes they were hung by the hearth, sometimes, more discreetly, in the loft, where they'd smell faintly of hay. You walk further into the garden, where a second woman is busy cutting long tufts of soft green moss from the shady side of a low stone wall. She shakes it free of soil, rolls it into a loose bundle, and tucks it into a small linen pouch. This moss, she explains, will be used in the same way as the cloth strips, but unlike the linen, it's disposable. Once soiled, it can be buried in the earth or thrown onto the midden heap. The moss is absorbent, plentiful, and in her eyes, more comfortable. Whether that comfort outweighed the risk of irritation or infection is something historians still debate. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. In some rural communities, dried sheep's wool, picked clean of burrs and debris, was used as a menstrual pad, sometimes scented with herbs to mask odor. The herbs weren't purely for pleasantries. Certain plants like sage and rosemary were thought to have purifying properties, warding off bad humors that supposedly built up in the body during menstruation. You pass a cluster of women gathered around a table in a courtyard. They're sewing long, narrow strips of linen, chatting quietly as they work. One gestures to the fabric, explaining that these are girdle cloths designed to be worn with a belt to hold them in place. The belt, usually leather or braided wool, would circle the waist, with the cloth looped or pinned to it, running between the legs. It's practical enough, but you can imagine the chafing, especially during a long day in the fields. And then there are the women who, for reasons of poverty, preference, or local custom, use nothing at all, allowing the menstrual flow to soak into undergarments, or even directly onto outer skirts, especially in rural settings where daily laundering is already an uphill battle. This might sound shocking now, but in a world without bright electric lighting or universally white linens, stains, often simply part of life. You pause at the edge of a narrow lane where a healer is setting out small clay pots. She stirs one and lets you see the contents. A thick, reddish-brown salve made from crushed plant roots and beeswax. This, she says, is applied to the skin during menstruation to draw out the excess heat. Whether it actually relieved cramps or simply distracted from them with its pungent smell is another question entirely. Historians still argue about how openly menstrual hygiene was discussed in medieval households. Some written records, often penned by male clerics, treat the subject as unworthy of detail, while others offer surprisingly practical instructions. What's clear is that the reality of managing menstruation was shaped by a woman's station, resources, and physical workload. A noblewoman might have a servant discreetly launder her clothes in a private basin, while a farm laborer might rinse hers in the nearest stream, far from curious eyes. There's also the question of pain, something that hygiene didn't necessarily solve, but that influenced how women navigated their days. Some records hint at women using heated stones wrapped in cloth as makeshift warming pads, resting them on the abdomen when they could afford to pause their work. Others brewed strong teas of yarrow or mugwort, both believed to regulate the flow and ease discomfort. As you wander, you can't help noticing that even in the middle of a medieval street, there are subtle signals between women, a lowered voice, a shared glance that indicates someone is in her days. It's a private language, part camaraderie, part caution. If you look closely, you see belts slightly adjusted, skirts tugged just so, or a woman excusing herself briefly from a task to step into the shadows. And of course, there's superstition. You overhear one older woman muttering to a younger that during her bleeding days, she mustn't knead bread, churn butter, or plant seeds, tasks that, according to local belief, could be spoiled by the touch of menstrual blood. Whether anyone truly believed these rules or simply used them as an excuse to avoid certain chores is anyone's guess. The sensory details linger with you. The faint herbal smell of dried rosemary mixed into wool pads, the rough weave of linen strips worn thin at the edges, the soft whisper of moss as it's packed into a pouch. There's a quiet resilience in these routines, a matter-of-fact acceptance that this is part of life, no less important than keeping one's feet dry or one's hair combed. By the time you return toward the town's main lane, the sun has dipped low and the windows glow with firelight. You pass one more scene, a young girl standing beside her mother, who is carefully folding a set of clean linen cloths. The girl watches intently, perhaps learning the process for her own future. No one speaks of it aloud, but you sense the thread of continuity stretching from this moment across centuries. The shared knowledge, the whispered tips, the unspoken understanding among women. And you realize, though the materials and methods may have been far from perfect, these small acts of care were as much about dignity as they were about cleanliness. In their own way, they were a quiet rebellion against the grime and chaos of the wider medieval world. You drift away from the quiet rhythms of the lane and follow the faint, unmistakable scent of warm milk and damp straw. The smell leads you toward the outskirts of the settlement, where barns huddle together in a row, and the low hum of life inside is punctuated by the occasional bleat of a goat or the grumble of a sleepy cow. Here, hygiene takes on an entirely different dimension, one that blends human and animal living spaces so thoroughly that it's hard to tell where the barn ends and the household begins. You pause at the doorway of a long, low building. Inside, a woman is crouched by a wooden pail, her hands red and raw from the cold as she milks a cow. The steam from the animal's breath mingles with the chill of the evening, creating a damp, earthy fog in the air. The cow's flank is flecked with dried mud, and you notice something else, a few strands of straw clinging stubbornly to the woman's hair. She doesn't seem to mind. Here, these little minglings of dirt and life are simply part of the day's work. Mainstream historical accounts confirm that many medieval households, especially in poorer rural areas, shared their living quarters with livestock during the colder months. Not just for convenience, but because animals gave off warmth, and their presence could mean the difference between surviving the winter or freezing in your sleep. The downside, of course, was the smell. Manure piled up in the corners until it could be cleared, and though fresh straw was added regularly, the floor was always damp underfoot. The quirky detail that catches your attention tonight is the idea of floor composting. Not an intentional compost heap, but the gradual buildup of straw, droppings, and food scraps on a barn floor that would be trampled down into a thick, warm layer over time. In some places, this layer might remain for months before being shoveled out and spread on the fields. The heat from the slow decomposition was not just tolerated, but welcomed, a natural underfloor heating system of sorts. You step further inside, careful to avoid a low-hanging beam, and notice a small wooden cradle tucked in the corner, not in the house, but right here in the barn, near the goats. A mother is rocking her child to sleep while she works. This isn't as strange as it might sound in tight spaces. The barn often was the house, with a thin wall or no wall at all between human beds and animal stalls. The air is rich with the scent of hay, milk, and, well, less pleasant notes. It's an aroma you can't quite wash out of your clothes. Historians still argue whether such arrangements were more common in certain regions, or simply a matter of poverty everywhere. What's certain is that the close quarters invited more than just warmth. They brought fleas, lice, and the occasional rat into daily life. A chicken might hop onto the bed frame in the early morning, looking for crumbs, while a cat, valued as much for its hunting skills as for companionship, might curl up beside you at night. You watch as a young girl, maybe 10 or 11, fills a trough with water for the pigs. She laughs when one splashes her skirt, not out of joy exactly, but because there's no point in minding it. That skirt has probably been splattered by worse things many times. Later, she will rinse it in a nearby stream, the same one the family uses for washing their hands and faces. The concept of clean here is relative. Clean means no visible muck, no clinging straw, and hopefully no lingering smell strong enough to turn a neighbor's head. There's a curious little ritual happening in another stall. An older man, perhaps the head of the household, is sprinkling ashes over the packed dirt floor. The woman beside him explains that this helps sweeten the ground, cutting down on odor and discouraging flies. It's a trick handed down from her grandmother, one that serves both practical and symbolic purposes. The ashes are also thought to purify the space, protecting both animals and humans from illness. Whether it truly worked or simply seemed to is up for debate. The sensory overload is remarkable. The squelch of damp straw underfoot, the sudden warm brush of a goat's flank as it sidles past, the sharp tang of urine mingled with the faint sweetness of hay. The barn is alive in every corner, not just the animals themselves, but the insects, the smells, the warmth, and the low, constant background noise of chewing, breathing, and shifting. You duck into a smaller structure beside the main barn, a chicken coop, though coop might be too generous a word. The birds roost on rough-hewn perches above a layer of straw littered with droppings. A woman in a patched wool dress reaches under one hen and triumphantly pulls out a warm egg, wiping it clean with the hem of her skirt before tucking it into her apron pocket. The egg will be boiled for breakfast. The skirt will be worn again tomorrow. There is no laundry crisis here, only an unspoken acceptance that everything, clothes, tools, people, will carry the barn's scent for days. And yet, there's a strange coziness in it all. You can see why, in a world without sealed windows or central heating, the barn was not just a place for animals, it was a heartbeat of the household. A woman might spin wool beside the sheep pen, the animals bleating a kind of background music. Children might do their lessons by firelight, while a cow dozed a few feet away. One elderly woman you meet insists that the animals actually made her healthier. She claims their warmth keeps the blood moving, and their breath drives out the winter chill. Whether this is folk wisdom or simple optimism, you can't help noticing she's lived long enough to outlast most of her neighbors. Maybe there's something to it, or maybe she's just lucky. By the time you step back into the night air, your senses are humming. The cold breeze is a relief after the dense barn atmosphere, but you carry with you the understanding that in medieval life, the boundary between human and animal hygiene was thin to non-existent. They shared warmth, space, and inevitably, a good deal of dirt. You realize, as you glance back at the dim glow of the barn door, that for many women, tending animals wasn't a task separate from keeping the household. It was the household. The same hands that milked the cow would knead the bread, mend the clothes, and if need be, wash a child's face with the same water bucket used for the goats. It was all part of one seamless, messy, necessary whole. From the barns, you follow a narrow path toward a cluster of houses with heavy wooden doors and small, smoky windows. The smell shifts gradually, less hay and manure now, more of something sour, earthy, and faintly vinegary. It's the unmistakable scent of medieval laundry day, though to call it day is generous, since this chore could easily stretch into 2 or 3. You hear the slap of wet cloth before you see the source. Around a low stone basin, several women are gathered, sleeves rolled up past their elbows, skirts hiked to avoid the inevitable splashes. Their dunking coarse linen shifts into cloudy water, then pounding them against the flat rock with wooden paddles. The sound is rhythmic, almost hypnotic, thwack, splash, thwack, and the occasional burst of laughter breaks the monotony. Your first impression is that the water itself seems questionable, and that's because it is. Historically, washing clothes in the medieval period didn't involve fresh mountain streams and fragrant soap bubbles. Instead, these women are working in water steeped with fermented urine, known, charmingly, as lant. It's the ammonia that does the trick, breaking down oils and loosening grime from the fibers. You watch as one woman hauls a fresh bucket from a covered barrel, the liquid pale yellow, and smelling strongly enough to make your eyes water. The mainstream historical fact here is that urine-based washing was common well into the early modern era, valued for its cleaning power long before chemical detergents existed. As unpleasant as it sounds, it was efficient. And in a world where cloth was expensive and rarely replaced, making the most of every cleaning method was essential. The quirky tidbit: some wealthier households actually paid servants to collect urine from the street, taverns, and even chamber pots of neighbors. There was status in having your linen washed thoroughly, which in this case meant with the freshest, most potent lant money could buy. The idea of a urine collector making polite rounds with a bucket is both bizarre and perfectly logical in this setting. Historians still argue whether the average peasant household laundered their main garments more than once every few weeks or months. What they agree on is that the linen underclothes, the chemise or shift, were the most frequently washed, since they sat next to the skin and soaked up sweat, oils, and dirt. Outer garments, often wool, might go an entire season without proper washing, merely being shaken out, brushed, or aired near the hearth. You notice the women here chatting as they work, gossiping about who's expecting a child, whose cow has gone dry, and whether the miller is cheating customers again. This communal aspect of laundry was as important as the cleaning itself, a rare chance for women to socialize outside the confines of their homes. But it also meant sharing all the odors, splashes, and occasional floating mysteries that drift through the wash tub. The washing process is methodical. Soak the cloth in lant, beat it against the rock, rinse it, sometimes in the same water everyone else is using, and then spread it out on the grass or a hedge to dry. You watch as one woman carefully lays her freshly rinsed chemise on a bush, the wind lifting the sleeves like ghostly arms. There's also a makeshift boiling area nearby, a large iron cauldron perched over a smoky fire. A younger girl stirs the water inside, steam curling around her face. Into the bubbling pot go handfuls of ash and crushed soapwort leaves, a natural foaming plant. The garments come out scalding hot, slightly grayer than before, but unquestionably cleaner by medieval standards. Still, the process leaves a lingering scent, part urine, part smoke, part damp wool that will follow the wearer for days. And yet, in this moment, the women seem unconcerned. Their fingers are wrinkled from soaking, their backs bent from leaning over the basin, but their voices are bright. Perhaps the fresh air, the shared work, and the feeling of progress outweigh the less than pleasant sensory details. One older woman demonstrates a trick for whitening fabric. She smears a paste made from clay and water onto the damp linen, then leaves it in the sun. She claims the sun bleaches the sins away. Whether that's literal or just her way of keeping conversation lively, you're not entirely sure. You step a little closer to the washing rock and catch sight of a shift, with curious embroidered initials on the hem, faded but still visible. The owner explains that marking clothes was common to avoid mix-ups on communal laundry days. Imagine the chaos if two nearly identical chemises got swapped. You might never see your favorite garment again. As the day wears on, the washing slows, and the women begin wringing out the last few pieces. Their arms are sore, and the water in the basin is now more mud than liquid. Someone appends it into the grass, where it soaks in with a smell that will linger until the next rain. You notice that laundry here is less about the modern idea of freshness and more about necessity. It's a process of making clothes good enough to wear again, not spotless, not scented with flowers, but visibly cleaner than before and free from the worst of the stains. And if that means enduring the sting of ammonia in your nose and the ache in your shoulders, so be it. As you walk away, you pass the drying hedges, the linen flapping in the breeze like pale flags. In the fading light, it's almost pretty until the wind shifts and carries a hint of that sharp, unmistakable laundry day smell straight into your path. You breathe it in, and for just a moment, you can almost believe this is what clean smells like. The road turns muddy beneath your feet, and you follow it toward the low, sagging cottages at the edge of the village. Smoke curls lazily from their chimneys, mixing with the damp air. The scent is not unpleasant wood fire, a little bread baking somewhere, but there's something else layered under it, something faintly alive. You step inside one of the cottages and are greeted not by a warm welcome, but by a chorus of tiny movements in the straw-filled bed against the wall. You don't see the culprits right away. You feel them. The first is a faint tickle on your wrist as you brush past the rough wool blanket. Then another on your ankle. And when you glance down, there's the telltale dart of a flea disappearing into the shadows of your stocking. The woman who lives here notices your discomfort and smiles in a way that says she's entirely used to it. She gestures toward the bed, a simple wooden frame stuffed with straw, the kind that's been flattened and compacted by years of use. The straw is dark with age, some of it crumbling into dust at the touch. Above it hangs a faded canopy, more to catch falling debris from the thatched roof than to provide any romantic flourish. This is bed sharing in its truest medieval form, not just between husband and wife, but often with children, relatives, and in poorer households, even visitors. Warmth was precious, and a human body was one of the most reliable heaters available. In winter, this closeness was a comfort. In summer, it was more of a trial. Either way, you didn't sleep alone. The mainstream historical fact here: bed sharing was a social and practical necessity. A single bed could easily accommodate multiple people, sometimes half the household, especially in one-room cottages where every inch of space mattered. This wasn't only in peasant homes. Even inns and guest houses in larger towns frequently offered a spot in a shared bed to travelers who had never met before. The quirky tidbit: in certain regions, some households placed dried herbs, lavender, mint, rosemary between the sheets to discourage insects. Not only did it smell better for a short while, but it was believed to help keep fleas and lice at bay. Of course, it also meant you sometimes woke up with bits of crushed plant in your hair, your ears, and occasionally your mouth. Historians still argue whether medieval people simply accepted bedbugs, fleas, and lice as inevitable, or whether they actively fought against them in any consistent way. Evidence exists for both. Some records describe careful combing, boiling bedding, and replacing straw mattresses, while others paint a picture of complete indifference, with pests seen as just another part of life, like rain, mud, or the church bells on Sunday. Tonight, the cottage air is heavy with that earthy mix of wool, straw, and humanity. The mattress doesn't just hold people, it holds history. Each time someone turns over, there's a soft rustle as the straw shifts. You realize that the mattress is likely changed only once or twice a year. When it's new, it's filled with fresh straw. When it's old, it's less fresh. You imagine the blend of insect shells, dust, and hair that builds up over months. The woman offers you a place on the edge of the bed. You lie down carefully, feeling the uneven lumps beneath your shoulder blades. The blanket is heavy, the kind of weight that pins you in place. Someone shifts beside you, a small child, hair tousled, already half asleep. Their breath is warm and smells faintly of whatever stew was eaten for supper. It's not just human company you're keeping. Every so often, you feel that familiar skitter across your skin. You brush at it reflexively, but there's no real escape. In the dim light, you can make out the tiny shapes moving along the seam of the blanket. Fleas are nimble, quick, and tireless. They don't just bite, they leap, vanishing into folds of cloth only to return when you least expect it. One of the older boys in the family shows you the flea trick, placing a shallow dish of water near the bed, with a candle burning in the middle. The idea is that fleas, drawn to the warmth, will jump toward the light and fall into the water. You glance at the dish on the floor, already speckled with the black dots of tiny drowned bodies. and feel a strange mix of satisfaction and mild horror. Bed sharing is intimate in ways modern minds might not expect. In this bed, you hear every sigh, every cough, every muttered dream. You share the same patch of air, warmed by breath and thick with the scent of wool, herbs, and bodies. In the darkest hours, you can't tell whose limbs are whose. Privacy is a luxury you do not have. Yet there's something about it that feels, in a strange way, safe. The walls may be thin, the nights cold, and the pests persistent, but you're not alone. If danger came, whether from a prowling thief or a sudden storm, you'd all rise together. And in the morning, the day would begin the same way it ends, with shared warmth and a resigned tolerance for the creatures that come with it. As dawn creeps through the window, the family stirs. You watch as the bed is quickly made, not with fresh sheets, but by smoothing the blanket and tucking it in at the corners. The straw mattress is left as it is, the night's activity buried beneath another layer of everyday life. You step outside, brushing your clothes as discreetly as possible, flicking away any small stowaways that might have followed you. The air feels fresher now, cooler, cleaner. You realize just how much the bed's atmosphere had pressed in on you, and how easy it would be, after a few days, to stop noticing it entirely. Bed sharing, you think, is not just about sleeping. It's about surrendering to the reality of the world around you. The warmth is welcome. The company is unavoidable. And the bugs, well, they're part of the deal, whether you like it or not. The morning road carries you deeper into the village, but you hardly notice the scenery at first. You're too distracted by the faint, persistent itch behind your ear. You scratch it without thinking, and your fingers come away with the unsettling certainty that you've just disrupted a tiny, determined resident. A quick glance at your sleeve reveals the truth. A louse, moving with the confidence of someone who knows they belong. You try to flick it away, but it clings stubbornly to the fabric before finally disappearing into the grass. And that's when you realize you're not imagining it. Your scalp tingles in new, inventive ways, like someone is running an invisible comb through your hair, backwards, over and over again. Welcome to the medieval reality of head lice. Lice are not a modern nuisance with ancient roots. They were as integral to medieval life as bread or church bells. No one was truly immune, from peasants trudging through muddy lanes to queens seated on velvet thrones. The mainstream historical fact here: head lice were so common that their presence barely registered as remarkable. They didn't carry the deadly plagues fleas sometimes did, but they were annoying, persistent, and socially unavoidable. You step into another cottage, smaller than the last, and find a woman sitting near the hearth with her daughter between her knees. In her hand, a fine-toothed comb of bone, its teeth worn smooth from years of use. She moves the comb slowly through the girl's hair, pausing to inspect it closely every few passes. When she finds something, she deftly pinches it away and drops it into a small bowl of water at her side. This is nitpicking in its original, literal sense. It's not a chore to be done in a rush. It's a slow, almost meditative ritual. It's also, perhaps unexpectedly, a social act. One person combs, the other sits still, and in the quiet between words, there's a strange kind of intimacy. The quirky tidbit. Some households believed that smearing goose fat, butter, or even crushed herbs directly into the hair would make it harder for lice to cling. Theoretically, it might also suffocate them, though in practice, it probably just made your pillow smell like a roast dinner. Still, there are accounts of people swearing by the method, though one wonders if they were simply too polite to admit it didn't work. Historians still argue whether medieval people saw lice as a serious problem, worth active prevention, or simply as one of life's constants. Some sources suggest people regularly washed hair and bedding to reduce infestations. Others describe noble households where servants picked lice from their masters without comment mid-conversation, as though it were as routine as adjusting a sleeve. The daughter squirms under her mother's hand, not from pain, but from the endless patience required to sit still. Every few minutes, the woman leans forward to check her own hair by feel, fingertips tracing the part in her scalp. She finds something, snaps it between her nails, and continues. You begin to notice how many tools in this home are designed for grooming in a world without chemical shampoos. Combs carved from wood, bone, or even ivory, if the owner could afford it. A small clay pot holds a thick paste of crushed rosemary and vinegar, meant to be rubbed into the scalp and left to discourage unwelcome guests. You can't help but imagine the pungent cloud such a mixture would create in a crowded bed. Outside, a boy runs past you, laughing, his hair sticking out at all angles. You catch sight of something tiny scurrying near his hairline before it vanishes again. He doesn't seem to notice. To him, it's just another part of growing up, like scraped knees or outgrowing shoes too fast. And here, where you encounter a distinctly medieval logic. If everyone has lice, there's no shame in it. The shame comes only if you're seen as too lazy to deal with them. That's why you'll sometimes spot people in public spaces, doorways, marketplaces, even churchyards, casually picking at a companion's hair while carrying on a perfectly normal conversation. In the evening light, you pass a family sitting outside their home. One woman braids another's hair, pausing now and then to investigate a suspicious itch. It's almost tender, the way her hands move, efficient, practiced, but never hurried. The comb, when used, is handled with the same care you might use for a precious heirloom, because for many, it was. A good comb could last decades, passed from mother to daughter, its teeth slowly darkening from years of oil and touch. And you realize something. This isn't just hygiene, it's connection. The act of nitpicking forces you to be close, to focus on another person in a way that's rare today. It's the medieval version of scrolling through someone's phone pictures, time-consuming, oddly intimate, and a little invasive, but offered in a spirit of shared life. Of course, the lice don't particularly care about this sentimentality. They will return in days or weeks, drawn by warmth, shelter, and the easy commute from one head to another in a world where personal space is more concept than reality. As you walk away, the itch on your scalp hasn't gone. You know you've probably picked up a few passengers along the way. Maybe they're already setting up their tiny, determined colony. You think briefly about the rosemary vinegar paste and decide that perhaps you'll wait until you're far, far away before trying anything quite that aromatic. The lane curves past a row of weathered wooden stalls, and there, in the shifting light, you catch the glint of metal. At first, you think it's just the sun bouncing off a cooking pot, but as you draw nearer, you see it's a woman's hand, moving lazily as she haggles with a merchant. The hand is adorned with rings, some heavy with tarnish, others so embedded with a dark patina they look as if they've grown into her skin. You slow your pace, letting your eyes wander from her fingers to her wrist, where a bracelet sits snug. So snug, in fact, that the skin beneath looks pale and pinched. And that's when you notice the thing you can't unsee. A faint rim of grime peeking from the edge, like a shadow that clings no matter how she shifts. It's the kind of dirt that tells you one simple truth: this bracelet hasn't been removed in a very, very long time. Jewelry in the medieval world wasn't just an accessory. It was identity, wealth, social signaling. For women, especially those who couldn't own much property outright, a ring or necklace was more than decoration. It was portable security, a promise that could be traded or pawned in desperate times. That's your mainstream historical fact. Jewelry was both adornment and asset, kept close, not just for beauty, but for survival. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some women wore their jewelry so continuously that when the time finally came to remove it, whether for sale, repair, or burial, it revealed a ghostly outline in the skin, an imprint like a shadow of metal. In certain cases, the removal was even tricky. Swelling, dirt, and years of skin, adjusting to the shape, meant the piece had to be coaxed off with oil or water. One chronicler even joked about a noblewoman whose ring had taken vows with her finger and refused divorce. Historians still argue whether jewelry was regularly taken off for cleaning. Some suggest that wealthier women had servants to scrub these treasures, ensuring the metals shone and the skin beneath stayed fresh. Others point to accounts and illustrations that show women clearly wearing the same pieces day after day, season after season, suggesting that constant wear was more common than we'd think. You follow the woman with the tarnished rings into a dimly lit house, where she greets a younger girl, her daughter, perhaps, by reaching out to adjust a necklace lying slightly askew. The necklace itself is a fine chain, its links darkened by time, and when she shifts it, you see the skin beneath, pale, a little flaky, marked by a faint greenish tinge where copper has reacted with sweat. The air in the room is close, heavy with the smell of bread cooling on the hearth and the faint metallic tang from the jewelry. A small wooden chest sits open on a nearby bench, revealing more pieces, rings, pendants, brooches, nestled on scraps of cloth. Some look polished, but most are dulled, their shine buried under the patina of handling, sweat, and years of skin contact. The mother takes out a pair of earrings, dangling them from her fingers. They're elegant in design, but mottled at the clasp. She hands them to the girl, who slips them into her ears without so much as wiping them. It's a reminder that in this world, cleaning was not about removing every microscopic trace of dirt. It was about removing what you could see or smell, and sometimes not even that. Outside, the market is still buzzing. You pause at another stall where a silversmith is working, hammering a band into shape. He polishes it quickly with a scrap of cloth before handing it to a customer, who slides it onto her finger right there. And then, there's no thought of breaking it in or wearing it only for special occasions. Once on, it may not come off again for months, maybe years. It's not just about neglect or inconvenience. There's a certain medieval superstition in play here too. Removing a ring given in love could be seen as breaking the bond it represented. Taking off a necklace blessed by a priest might be viewed as courting bad luck. In some households, jewelry was like a second skin, part of the body in the eyes of its wearer. You walk on, past an older woman sitting in the shade, threading beads onto a string. Her hands are dark with work, her nails edged with dirt. Yet the beads she handles are brilliant, polished amber, catching the light in warm, golden flickers. When the string is complete, she ties it securely and places it around her own neck without hesitation. The beads rest against the hollow of her throat, where sweat will soon work its way into the tiny crevices between them. You realize she likely won't remove them again until necessity or mortality demands it. Later that evening, you find yourself by a fire in the company of two women mending clothes. As they talk, one idly twists a ring on her finger, trying to spin it around, but it catches on the knuckle. She laughs, admitting she can't get it off anymore. The other woman suggests warming her hand near the fire to make it soft, which she does, though you suspect it won't help much. The ring is part of her now, its presence both a comfort and a small, persistent inconvenience. There's a moment where you think about all the tiny ecosystems these ornaments might hold: sweat, skin cells, traces of food from fingers touching lips, the oils from animals worked with or cooked for supper. It's the kind of thought you wish you hadn't had right before eating, but it's also the quiet truth of life here. And in the flickering light, you realize how seamlessly this practice fits into everything else you've seen. Like linen worn until it stiffens, or hair combed with rosemary paste, jewelry in medieval life was something you lived in through chores, through seasons, through years. It carried your scent, your history, and whether you liked it or not, your dirt. You turned toward the door, glancing back at the two women laughing over their stuck rings. There's no embarrassment in their tone, no shame in the confession. It's simply one more piece of the long, unbroken thread of daily life. In this world, what you wear isn't just on you, it becomes you. You step away from the fire, and into the night air, letting the faint coolness brush over your face after the close, heavy warmth inside. The lane is quieter now, the market packed up, the smell of trampled herbs fading into the background. But you're not done observing. There's still one more piece of this long, unwashed puzzle to notice. You pass a low cottage where light spills faintly through the warped shutters. The door is open just enough to show a small gathering inside. 3 women seated near a table, leaning over cups of ale, their conversation soft but animated. Your eyes drift toward the middle one. She's older, her hair streaked with silver, and she wears a long, pale head covering that droops at the sides. Beneath it, however, you can see strands of hair matted at the temples, darkened not by shadow, but by the slow, greasy accumulation of days without washing. It's not that she doesn't care about cleanliness. In her world, washing hair is a production, heating water, mixing herbs or eggs, sometimes even waiting for the right phase of the moon if she's of the superstitious sort. Most of the time, hair is simply brushed and plaited, with scented oils or rosemary water combed through to mask any smell. That's your mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, hair washing could be an infrequent ritual, often replaced by perfumed rinses or powders. The quirky tidbit here: some women used stale ale as a hair rinse, claiming it added shine. Others swore by an infusion of burnt barley and water, which sounds harmless until you realize that the shine might be just a thin layer of residue coating each strand. And if you've ever accidentally left a beer bottle open for too long, you can imagine the faint aroma that might linger. Historians still argue whether hair hygiene was universally poor, or whether accounts of unwashed heads are exaggerated by later writers who wanted to paint the past as filthy. Some evidence, like combs found in graves, suggests women took real pride in grooming, even if it didn't involve the daily shampoo modern life demands. The woman shifts, pulling her veil forward as if she's aware of the matted patches. You wonder if it's for modesty or simply habit. Across from her, a younger woman has let her hair fall loose entirely, and you notice the ends are split and uneven. She runs her fingers through it absent-mindedly, and you watch as tiny specks drift down, perhaps dust from the rushes on the floor, perhaps flakes of skin. She doesn't seem to notice or care. They pass a small wooden comb between them, its teeth worn smooth and slightly darker at the base from years of use. It's not washed between hands. It simply moves from scalp to scalp, tugging through tangles, scraping up the residue of sweat and oil. It's both an intimate and communal act, a small comfort in a world where possessions are shared as easily as conversation. You lean against the doorframe, unnoticed, watching as they finish combing and rebraid their hair. The braids are thick and practical, designed to keep the hair from tangling during work or sleep. No ribbons, no elaborate curls, just the slow, repetitive motion of fingers twisting strands together, sealing in whatever is already there. Stepping back into the lane, you realize the air feels different now. The scent of cooking fires has mellowed, replaced by the cool, faintly damp smell of nightfall. You think of all the details you've collected over this slow journey, every patch of fabric worn thin, every garment stiff with age, every ornament welded to its owner by time and skin. And as you walk, it's as if they weave together in your mind into one seamless tapestry of medieval daily life, one that isn't clean in the way modern eyes expect, but is whole and lived in and entirely its own. You find yourself wandering to the edge of the village, where a small pond reflects the stars in broken patches. A woman kneels at the water's edge, rinsing a cloth in slow, unhurried motions. The ripples catch the starlight, and for a moment, it's almost beautiful, until you remember that this water is the same her neighbors will draw for cooking, for washing their faces, perhaps even for brewing. It's a closed loop, a shared resource that never stays entirely clean. She wrings the cloth out and drapes it over a nearby branch to dry. As she stands, you see the faint outline of dirt on her palms, the way her nails have collected shadows in their crescent shapes. And yet, there's no shame in her posture, no rush to scrub them out before she goes home. This is just life here, the slow accumulation of contact with the world, worn without apology. You sit at the pond's edge for a while, letting the stillness settle over you. Somewhere behind you, a door creaks shut, and the village sinks further into quiet. A soft wind moves through the trees, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke and rosemary, remnants of the day's small acts of care. They're not perfect by modern standards, but they are care nonetheless. And now you feel your own breath slowing, your shoulders loosening. The images of the day blur together, the woman with the tarnished rings, the stiff linen shift, the comb passed from hand to hand. They become a rhythm, gentle and lulling, like the distant sound of a market settling into sleep. The stars above seem to lean closer, their lights soft and unflickering. The village is wrapped in its own nighttime cocoon, and you can almost feel the weight of centuries pressing in, not heavily, but like a warm quilt. You close your eyes. The dirt, the sweat, the stubborn stains, they're all fading into something else now, something quieter. You can almost hear the rustle of braids being tied for the night, the faint chime of a bangle slipping down a wrist as its owner turns in her sleep. And you breathe out, because here, in this moment, there's no need to measure cleanliness against modern scales. There's only life, slow, imperfect, human, and the night that folds gently over it. And now, as the last echoes of the village fade, you feel your body settling more deeply into stillness. The lanes you walked earlier are now empty, the stalls folded away, the laughter and chatter replaced by the soft rhythm of distant breathing, of homes at rest. The fires burn lower, their glow just a warm pulse behind shutters, and the air carries that faint, sweet mix of cooling ash and herbs. The world feels smaller here, more contained. You can almost imagine pulling it over yourself like a blanket, its rough textures softened by the night. its imperfections smoothed away by the dark. There's a comfort in knowing that even in times without soap on every shelf or water on demand, people found their own ways to care for themselves and each other. Not perfect ways, not spotless ways, but enough to feel human and enough to feel home. Let the images fade now, the crooked bracelets, the unwashed braids, the market's mingled scents. Let them drift into the background, their details softening like ink in water. You're left only with the sense of a slower time, a gentler pace, where nothing had to be scrubbed away completely to be lived with. Your breath matches that pace now, slow and even. The cool night air brushes over you one last time, and then even that fades, replaced by a calm, steady quiet. It's all still there if you need to return, but for now, you can rest. The village sleeps, and so can you.